What's up, headliners? Kyle back. Week 16 tight end start and sit analysis. Now, if you watch the wide receiver start and sit analysis, I'm going to say the same thing here. We're keeping it simple this week, all right? Let's not overthink things. Let's not tinker too much. We have a team that's gotten us this far. Let's rely on it. Let's roll with our studs. Go with the guys that have got us here. Don't overthink it. Don't try to get crazy. Don't try to get creative. Just roll with your best lineup. Now, let's jump into it, but first, talking about what we did last week. And our percentage last week, 78% on tight ends. That's what I'm talking about. That's a nice little percentage there. A miss, TJ Hockenson. That always hurts to miss on TJ Hockenson because he's a guy that's been hitting so often lately. Irv Smith, a decent week. Didn't quite get to 10 fantasy points. However, Noah Fant, Logan Thomas, Hunter Henry, all three of them hit. So let's jump into our Christmas Day matchup right now. For Minnesota and New Orleans, last week we would have had 2 starts here, but this week we've got 2 sits. Irv Smith Jr., Tyler Conklin, both of them playing well right now, but not really getting enough on their own. You know, if Irv Smith Jr. or Conklin can find the end zone, that's basically going to put them right at 10 fantasy points more than likely, but they have to find the end zone, and I think Thielen and Jefferson are just getting so much of that volume, obviously running the ball a lot with Cook. It's not really leaving a lot of a ceiling for them. For New Orleans, Minnesota is pretty tough against tight ends right now. They spread the ball around. New Orleans throws the ball around, not Minnesota, but New Orleans has been spreading the ball around quite a bit. And for Jared Cook, I really would have thought last week would have been a great week for him. This week, it's not nearly as good as a matchup, and I expect the ball to be going everywhere once again. Tampa Bay and Detroit, and for Rob Gronkowski, we'll go back to him this week. Not a whole lot of output last week, but his 7 targets tied for the team league. So even in a week when all 3 of the Tampa Bay tight ends last week were starts, Gronkowski still saw 7 targets. Detroit, if Matthew Stafford plays, should put up just enough of a fight to allow for enough passing to get Gronkowski that type of targets again. For TJ Hockenson, also performance last week, but he should bounce back, and Tampa Bay is allowing almost 20 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends over the last 4 weeks. TJ Hockenson right now, number 3, number 4 tight end in the league in terms of a start each week. You can roll him out once again. George Kittle's trying to work his way back, and if for some reason, miraculously this week, we hear George Kittle is going to play, that's going to be a tough decision to make. As of right now, he is going to be a sit for me. I would need to see how much he practices. Is it in a limited capacity? Is it full? Does he practice? I got to see all that all week long before I make any type of decision on George Kittle. Now, if George Kittle doesn't play, we could look at Jordan Reed, but I'm going to list him as a sit because really, honestly, you're begging for a Jordan Reed touchdown for him to work out. And even if he does score a touchdown, doesn't necessarily guarantee 10 fantasy points. Now, for the Arizona Cardinals, I did decide to go with Dan Arnold as a start last week because it was a pretty decent matchup. Did have some decent yards last week, but still, championship week, if you're relying on Dan Arnold, holy smokes, how did you even make it this far? For Miami and Las Vegas, we know we're starting Darren Waller. Nothing to talk about there. For Miami, though, we're keeping an eye on Mike Gesicki. If Mike Gesicki plays, we'll roll Mike Gesicki out there. And apparently he was a lot closer last week than what I was anticipating. So if he were to make it back this week, he will end up being a start for me. So you got to keep an eye on the rankings because that is when we'll make a decision on whether or not we will play Mike Gesicki. For the other 2, though, Durham Smythe, Adam Shaheen. Smythe was the volume guy last week, which is basically what I had said going into the week. Smythe is going to be the volume guy. Shaheen, maybe some red zone looks. But right now, Miami's running the ball a lot, and then spreading the ball around to everyone else, especially when guys like Gesicki and Devontae Parker are missing. So if Gesicki does make it back and there's no Devontae Parker, we'll absolutely start Gesicki, but we got to wait and see how he practices this week. For Carolina and Washington, it's a no to Ian Thomas, but our Manscaped must start comes in this matchup because it is Logan Thomas this week. Now, for weeks now on the Waiver Wire show, I've been saying grab Logan Thomas and start Logan Thomas as much as you possibly can. Hopefully you all have been listening because if you have been, he's been absolutely lighting it up for you. Last week, 13 receptions on 15 targets. Holy crap, the dude is seeing some crazy type of volume. Now, a lot of it's going to come down to who's the starting quarterback this week. Dwayne Haskins, in a little bit of a trouble right now, going out to the strip clubs with no masks on, apparently. So we'll keep an eye on who that starting quarterback is. But Logan Thomas, Carolina is allowing 16 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends over the last 4 games. So Logan Thomas comes in as my Manscaped must start this week because of a great matchup and a ton of volume recently. Make sure you head over to manscaped.com. Use code word headliners. You can get 20% off and free shipping all of their great products. Now, if you didn't get a chance to trim up the tree before Christmas, now you get a chance to do so. So manscaped.com, 20% off with code word headliners. Make sure you go over there and order anything that you need today. It's the same old song and dance in Indianapolis. 3 tight ends, splitting snaps, splitting touches, splitting targets, splitting everything right now. Not risking it in week 16 with any of those guys. For Pittsburgh, we'll go ahead and list Eric Ebron as the start again. And man, what an awful performance last week. And I have no idea why, to be honest with you, because he only saw 1 target and negative game script against a team that hasn't done a good job against stopping tight ends this year. And not only that, on top of all of it, I mean, all the wide receivers were basically getting locked down besides Deontay Johnson. So why weren't you giving the ball to Eric Ebron even more? I don't get it. Hopefully they bounce it back this week, though. Eric Ebron's going to be lower on my rankings, but I will still list him as a start. For Atlanta and Kansas City, Travis Kelce, baby, we're putting him in our lineup every single week. Hayden Hurst is going to be a sit for me again this week. Yes, he had his first touchdown since week 6 last week. Julio Jones out tends to lead us to believe, maybe he could see something. But listen, the guy only has more than 30 receiving yards once in the last 5 weeks. I'm not trusting Hayden Hurst in championship week, and you shouldn't be either. There's not a lot to see here in the Chicago-Jacksonville matchup. Would love to see Cole Kmet or Jimmy Graham separate themselves and become a reliable starter every single week, but I'm just not seeing it right now. Maybe Cole Kmet for next year. Maybe he's a breakout candidate for next year. Would love to see it, but these guys are splitting way too much right now. And then, of course, for Jacksonville, they haven't had anybody that's been fantasy viable at tight end all year long. Cincinnati at Houston, another matchup, no fantasy viable options. Darren Fells, Jordan Akins, we haven't been getting anything out of them. Drew Sample, when Ryan Finley took over, I thought Drew Sample really could be a guy to step up. He hasn't done so either. So this matchup, it contains nobody that we're going to be putting in our lineup. For the Giants and the Ravens, we got a couple of options here. And for the Giants, obviously, we're going to be looking at Evan Ingram, but he's going to be lower in the rankings. The fantasy output hasn't been crazy, but the targets continue to be there on a weekly basis. And one of these weeks, he's just going to get back to producing. He's really the only passing option that's really working for me right now as well. So Evan Ingram against Baltimore, because the matchup's going to be so tough for the wide receivers, I'm willing to look his way this week, but much lower in the rankings. And Mark Andrews, since week 10, he has been uber consistent since week 10. During that time, he's averaging 13.3 fantasy points per game. That puts him at solid tight end 3 status during that time. He's a start for me again this week. For the New York Jets and the Cleveland Browns, the Jets again, toss it out the window. They don't have anybody that we're interested in. Cleveland, hey, was glad to see Austin Hooper back in the lineup last week, scoring a touchdown. But Hooper, Njoku, Bryant, all of these guys right now are getting some looks. They're getting all 3 of these guys onto the field, utilizing different looks for them. And again, in championship week, we want to keep it simple. And when you've got a team utilizing 3 tight ends, if you really want to try and pick one out of it, good luck, because I'm going to find somebody else. For Denver and LA, hey, we got another couple of tight ends here to utilize. Noah Fant, great week last week. Number 1 target in that offense right now. Continuing to look his way on a weekly basis based on volume. Hunter Henry, kind of the same thing. He's still getting a ton of targets right now. Still getting a ton of red zone looks. You know, he's got to score touchdowns. If he doesn't score a touchdown, he's going to be right around that 10 points. But if he scores a touchdown, he's locked and loaded as a top 5 tight end every single week. And if we've got a week this week where Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, maybe they're still a little bit banged up, Hunter Henry could be the number 1 target in that offense again. If not, he kind of goes back to being that number 2. But heck, give me the number 2 option with Justin Herbert over a majority of the other options out there. For Philadelphia and Dallas this week, Philadelphia, I'm going to list Ertz and Goddard both as starts. Both of them saw respectively 7 and 8 targets last week, and they're getting the most looks in this offense right now, and it's a great matchup. I'm not willing to bet on any of the wide receivers this week because the ball is going to be spread around to every single one of them. Ward's getting some red zone looks with the touchdowns. Jalen Reagor's getting like the majority of the targets for the wide receivers, but it's the tight ends that could make and break it for Jalen Hurts having a big week this week, and I still expect him to have a big week. So I will start both of those guys this week if you have the opportunity. For Dalton Schultz, though, again, kind of the same thing. He's averaging right around 6 to 8 fantasy points per game, but there's no upside for him. Hey, this time last year, Tyler Higbee was winning some fantasy football championships because the way he produced at the end of the season. And he is starting to come on a little bit as of late, but not nearly enough for me to trust him this year. So even though he won you some fantasy football championships this year, I don't think he's going to be doing a whole lot of it this year. For Seattle, Will Dissly, I would love to see this guy as a start every single week, but it could be Dissly, it could be Hollister. Metcalf and Lockett are taking the majority of it. They're still running the ball quite a bit. Whatever it may be, this matchup's not going to have any fantasy viable tight ends for me. For Tennessee and Green Bay, I'm getting a lot of questions. Kyle, what happened to Jonnu Smith? Unfortunately, it was just injuries. Injuries played a part in him going from being one of the top fantasy options this year to just completely imploding and down to not being a start for us in any given week. Because of the injuries, they started to get Fursker and Swaim in more, and then they started to rotate them so they keep Smith healthy. And that's really what it is right now, is they're just rotating all three of these guys in and out on a consistent basis. And Smith being hurt helped towards that rotation happening, which is very unfortunate. On the flip side for Green Bay, Robert Tonyan, going with him as a start again, baby. What can I say? The guy's just producing, and if you got a tight end that's producing with Aaron Rodgers as the quarterback, you put him in your lineup. Hey, over the last few weeks, Dawson Knox coming out of nowhere. He's been a fantasy viable tight end, and I'm missing on him every single week because of that. But listen, we're not going with it this week. This game has got nobody that I'm going to trust in my championship matchup at tight end. So let's go ahead and glaze over it. For Bills Mafia, it'll be a great game to watch. For fantasy football owners, unless you own Diggs, Allen, or Beasley, there's not going to be a whole lot here for you. There you have it, Headliner Nation, all set with my tight end start and sit analysis for week 16. Go out there, get your lineup set. Have a great rest of the week. I'll see you on the rankings episodes. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you comment with any questions that you have. And as always, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. Become a part of Headliner Nation today. Peace out, everybody. Stay safe. Stay healthy. I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.